Our elites have nothing to do with us. They can live in mansions on islands that you don't know about, that have no connection to you, yet they have power on you, and they see you as their resources that they get their money from, but they don't have any responsibility for you. So that's a serious problem. The story of the relationship between Christians and Jews is the craziest story in the world. It's actually one of the secrets is to really believe in the things that I talk about. That is, I know that truth wins in the end. You know, it might be a long slog and it might be painful, but I know that truth wins. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that I've never said to tell the story in public, and I'm going to tell it to you because it's the craziest story. I once met, we have to be able to see through this cloud to understand a more subtle version of reality, or else we are screwed.
On the show today, a very special guest. I'm actually a bit nervous for the first time in literally years doing this podcast. So what I decided to do is a slightly longer intro. I'm going to tell a life story and also the story of Western civilization in 3 minutes as a way of introducing him. It's a story of three JPs. Our guest today is the final boss of the JP pipeline. So I started out like most people before modernity as religious. My mum was actually a nun before she was my mother, so I was raised Catholic. Our first JP is symbolically, therefore, John Paul II, the Pope, the ex-Pope, just as a symbol, really, of traditionalism. By 10, however, modernity had caught up with me. And I remember my best friend James and I were in school and the local priest had come in and we mercilessly mocked him and said, "Do you really believe in those silly stories? They're just myths." And he didn't really have a good answer. And later we read Dawkins and Nietzsche because apparently God is dead and we're just selfish genes, and naturally nihilism led to hedonism, and James and I got in trouble with unboundaried sex, drugs and rock and roll. I painted my room black, and at university my tutors told me psychology didn't have a human soul. As someone kind of clever but depressed and alcoholic by this point, I wasn't really buying that. And I think this is where like most people are at in modernity today, where I was at as a teenager. I badly needed discipline, so I was drawn to the martial arts, later meditation, yoga, basically anything that wasn't Western or Christian. And I made those my world, I got a lot from them, but at times they felt like dressing up and no real substitute for an enchanted world. And then a few years later, the postmodernist thing kicked in. People started being very sensitive, worshipping emotions or some gurus. It turns out we just are devotional. People just are. Bodily hedonism, narcissism, the woke thing hit. All of a sudden, everyone had trauma, and everyone all of a sudden was a racist. And it felt like a kind of weird pseudo-religion. Now, the postmodern challenge brings us to the second JP, Jordan Peterson. Now, love him or hate him, it seems to me he was trying to save modernity from itself, hitting along with his colleague John Bevacqui, what they called the meaning crisis, really looking at that. Because without God, everyone is lost, addicted, and frankly, crazy. And if we're in hell that we deny exists, we might as well take responsibility and tidy our rooms, which I literally have just done. They discussed the psychology of religion and the deeper symbolism of Bible stories and gave us a lot. They've often been in discussion with our guest today, but I think he takes it a step further in that not just that we interpret things psychologically, but that symbols are reality ontologically. What I noticed personally while teaching a group of therapists, movement people, and nuns in the war in Ukraine, it was the nuns who were the best regulated, the Catholic nuns. I also noticed that it was a Mary statue that I wanted in my bomb shelter, not an IKEA Buddha. Our guest today helped me make sense of that. Frankly, it's his fault that I go to mass again. And part of the reason I live in Slovenia, I think, is his fault too. I love that he's comfortable with symbolism of both Marvel superheroes as well as Orthodox saints. He publishes fairy tales as well as super intellectual debates. He's an icon carver and founder of the really popular Symbolic World YouTube channel. I don't have the music now, but frankly, he's a legend. Jonathan Pageau, bienvenue, welcome.
Well, thank you for that amazing introduction. It's good to get to know you just in 3 minutes. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I thought it might help us have a better conversation. Is there anything that was sparked in that? Obviously, it's difficult to, do Western civilization in 3 minutes and name some of your colleagues and I think friends. So anything that was sparked from that?
No, I think that, your story sounds familiar. It sounds like the story of a lot of people that I encounter all the time. Young people, especially people in their 20s and 30s, people who had it all, like everything that the liberal world promised. They had everything that the boomers fought for. They had, all the entertainment, all the porn, all the freedom, all the sexual licentiousness, and they're depressed. And and so I think that that's the thing, the meaning crisis, that in some ways we got what we were promised and it didn't yield enough for people to find meaning in their life. So yeah.
I heard you do a talk at a church where you said, yeah, modernity, you basically paraphrased, you've had your chance, but it didn't really work, did it? Hasn't really worked out. And what I notice is a lot of people, when they realize that, are kind of angry, particularly on the right. There's often this embodiment of people quite a bit bitter, a bit angry, and there's lots to be angry about. You look at the world, the news. First thing I want to do is I want to ask you maybe something you've never been asked, I've heard before, which is how do you keep so happy? You just seem sort of radiantly in a good mood despite the horrors of the world. So, what's your secret?
I mean, one of the secrets is to really believe in the things that I talk about. That is, I know that truth wins in the end. It might be a long slog and it might be painful, but I know that truth wins. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that my private life is beautiful. I have wonderful children. I have a wonderful wife. I have a nice home. I love being with the people around me. And so I think that I have I have a great relationship with my parents. I feel like I have a good, steady, and I'm on my parish council. So I feel like I have a good, steady base. And so, and when I leave this kind of internet world, I'm completely anonymous where I live. Nobody knows me. I just live my life. So I think that helps.
You seem sort of well co-regulated and
Yeah,
eco-regulated and theo-regulated, all the types of regulation. Like,
there you go.
I mean, it really stands out if you look at kind of the average group of sort of right-leaning thinkers having a conversation.
Yeah.
You're a lot shinier than the others, and that was one of the things that drew me to your work, actually.
Well, it's also because I think one of the issues that you see on the conservative side, or what you could call the right side, is that people are still in the reactionary mode. People have accepted that term, the idea that right-leaning people or conservatives are reactionary. That is, in some ways, that they're angry about the changes and they want to just scale it back. I always say, I say tradition without nostalgia. That is, I believe in the positive image of the values that were carried to us, but I don't have any desire to go back to some time in the past, or I don't have a desire to like scale back these different things. I want a positive description of what the world I want to live in is. And so, a lot of the right-wing people too, they complain about culture, they complain about politics, but they don't make culture. They don't participate, they don't
Right. They
do
don't make
anything.
art, they don't make movies,
They're
children's
just
books.
angry. And so that's a really sad place to stay in. So hopefully I'm able to find a balance between actually creating art and creating culture, but also having a wise eye to be able to critique things that are not good.
So not just fighting a losing battle. Sometimes the conservative side feels like, okay, there's this thing called progress and we can't stop it and it's inevitable and we're just sort of slowing down the decay. Whereas you seem to have a more positive vision and of not just tradition as looking back, did I hear that right? But some sense of how I'd like the world to be.
Yeah, well, when people say they say the right is the brake and the left is the gas pedal, and I've heard people say that that's nonsense. That's really ridiculous. This then there's this idea that in some ways we are moving towards this progressive utopia, and the conservatives are just there to slow us down so that we don't
Right.
break things as we're getting there. That's ridiculous. I think for example, the notion of the family as the deepest social unit, the idea of religious participation, these are positive truths. These are not breaking or stopping things from going in any direction. They're actually saying, no, this is the shape of the world, right? This is actually how the world functions. And that to me is it's a much stronger position.
Is that the heart of your work? Like, this is the shape of the world. These symbolic patterns aren't just imposed upon the world. They're not something clever people figure out from just sort of cold material facts, but actually, it's right. It's like the wetness in the water. It's like deep, like, what is it? Closer to man than his jugular vein, the Sufis say, right? That's the
Yeah.
sense I get. Is that
Yeah, I think
accurate
that
reading?
that's right. I think that the world. shows itself to us. We participate in the world through these deep patterns. We have to, because the world is too complicated, right? There are too many things going on simultaneously at the same time. In order to be able to even move in the world, we have to prioritize, and we have to, move with a kind of relevance. You talk about John Vervaeke as this
Yep.
beautiful idea of relevance realization, which is that organizes the world in patterns, but those patterns are real. They're not illusions. They're not imposed on top of reality. And I think that both the religious way of thinking and now the cog sci way of thinking, and even in terms of talking about complexity in general, is leading us away from this like weird subject object division that has plagued modernity. This idea that we are these individuals that are completely removed from the world, and now we impose meaning on top of reality. Even from a scientific point of view, that's just not possible because we're part of a complex system, and therefore there's a loop, right? There's a kind of feedback loop between the world and us that necessarily has to exist in order for us to be able to live in it.
And differentiating this from the kind of postmodern swamp of that's just your truth, man, and there's no right, no wrong, no judgment. I hear this a lot in the embodiment world. And I was like, well, you can't even see without judgment, let alone like, what am I going to do today? I get up in the morning, I need to discern something is good, and beauty seems to be a pretty important thing because if you try and live without it, people, die pretty quickly, and the tourists come to Slovenia for the beauty. It seems like pretty real.
That's right. I mean, I think that's the right way of saying it. You could even sometimes I try really hard to describe it outside of the usual kind of ethical morality that we deal with. It's just to say, engaging in certain pattern yields certain results. If you do certain things and you look at certain things and you attend to certain things, then these things will happen, right? If you drink a bottle of vodka, then you can't stop what's going to happen. You can't invent what's going to happen. If you get married, if you do these certain things, then there will be certain results. And so I think that that's one of the ways of talking about this. That is, if you eat dirt, then you choke on it, and that's something that is not had nothing to do with your own personal imposition of meaning on top of the world. It's like the world actually will resist you and will manifest itself to you.
Yeah, gravity bites back. Gravity
That's
loves
right.
us. These are other kinds of gravity. I've tried to break all the rules at some point. Like I'm going to cheat this. I'm going to drink every day, and it's going to be fine. I'm going to cheat the system, and I personally have found that doesn't really work very well.
Yeah, well, your liver at some point says, you know what, you can want to do this as long as you want, but at some point, there will be consequences to our actions, both in the positive and the negative. And I think that that's what true morality is. True morality is not some weird kind of imposition of rules on top of reality. It's actually just an image of the natural world. It's an image of saying, well, if you do this, there are results, and we don't want those results, and therefore we will impose some kind of stricture on the world. But yeah,
It strikes me that there's a lot of this is about boundaries. So, whether it's sexual boundaries, at the moment, everyone's obsessed with it was, Trump's wall, and now it's ICE. The assertion of boundaries, which of course can be done too harshly. Just don't want to, say that. In people's lives, in the coaching world, everyone's obsessed with boundaries. They're like, that's my boundary. It's like society is setting no boundaries, so we have to do it individually.
that's
It's quite
right.
it's quite a big ask to invent relationships and to invent workplace. And so what's this obsession with boundaries that's going on at the moment?
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, you saw it. COVID was a great example of the question of asking where should you put boundaries, and because our world is so fragmented, we really struggle to notice how you layer boundaries, right? So we think in absolutes. We think either, you bring in all immigrants into your country, but wear a mask in order to protect yourself individually from everyone. There's this like weird obsession with that kind of excess, you could say. But the best way to do it, the normal way to do it would be to have layered boundaries, would be to have normal boundaries between individuals, then normal boundaries between families. And this would create the kind of balance. But because someone wants to live the way they want and they want to be able to do anything that they want, then all of a sudden, when that hits, then they become obsessed with boundaries, and they have to, like you said, they have to be explicit, like say, oh no, this is my boundary. I won't do this. But in a normal world, you usually wouldn't have to, in a normal world where people are acting normally, the boundaries set themselves up organically all at every level.
Yeah, as someone that's learned boundaries through sobriety, for example, I kind of view the addicts and the child's view of freedom of I'll do what I want. And then, of course, that actually leads to sort of weird tyrannies and pushbacks and extremes. It seems like that's the lie of that version of freedom that's been sold.
That's a way to understand it, is that when you have excessive licentiousness or excessive freedom, then that leads naturally to a kind of tyrannical reaction, right? And so this is why, you talk about Sufism, this beautiful poem about the idea that if you keep the hand completely open or if you keep the hand completely closed, you're paralyzed. But you want the world to be this kind of gentle opening and closing of the hands, like the wings of a butterfly. You want that nice kind of balance. But if you say that an addict is a great example, the addict for too long wanted to do whatever they wanted. And then in that excess, in order to save themselves, has to put the strictest boundaries on their behavior that someone who never went as far in that direction wouldn't have to think of, wouldn't, to say like, I will not have one single drop of alcohol ever. That becomes necessary for an addict. But for a person that doesn't go in that direction, they can kind of manage that in and out. They can feel it. Oh, okay, I had 2 drinks last night, like maybe that's a little much, like, or 3 drinks or whatever. Like today I'm not going to drink anything. That's just like normal balance that happens in normal people.
And is there a risk that we swing from the kind of crazy liberal open, sort of at the last few hundred years have been increasingly liberal. So I don't, for listeners, I don't mean kind of Democrat or Labour Party or anything like that. And I think people's big fear is then that it kind of gets asserted in a very strong way, whether that be Islam or the Handmaid's Tale, which almost seems like a fantasy sometimes. I've seen there's a weird quality of calling in something that looks really harsh.
Yeah.
Or the actual far right, as opposed to the British government's version of the far right, inverted commas. So, is there a sort of a risk of a swing the other way?
Of course. Yeah, of course. You see it in the 20th century from Weimar to the Reich is probably the clearest example of this swing, where in some ways a kind of fragmentation, breakdown of society and a type of moral licentiousness that was out of control a led to tyranny. And so I don't see that's why I always talk about this where when I look at the woke stuff and I'm thinking, this is very dangerous, not just for itself, but also because what it's going to call out is going to call out some kind of like tyrannical reaction to the woke stuff. And so that's why we advocate for subsidiarity and a kind of natural order of things where we find we don't let ourselves go in these excesses in none of the places in our life. We try to find this kind of natural balance.
I'm a bit obsessed with your work on the post-World War II consensus. I mean, that seems to be. Would you like to summarize that briefly for listeners? I think it's really relevant to many issues today.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's going on now is in some ways because the boomers are dying, the people that were in the war, the people that had witnessed the war, that had knew people that were in the war are kind of going away. There's a kind of natural progression where the story that's been holding us together since World War II is collapsing. And it's collapsing in all kinds of ways. One of the things that happened at the end of World War II is that in some ways we had a devil, Hitler, pretty clear. And then we were the good guys. We liberated Europe. We were the good guys in the war. But there was a kind of secret in that winning, which is that we had partnered with the devil, with Stalin, in order to win the war. And that secret was kind of held at bay. We didn't really talk about it. We continued to portray the fascists as the most evil. And although we did believe the communists were evil, they weren't as evil, obviously. And you know that because you can walk around with a communist flag all day and nothing will happen to you. But if you walk around with a Nazi flag, people will literally attack you in the street, which is shows you kind of what happened. And so, but that let's say that order is somewhat breaking down because it is related to excess. Think about it this way. So Nazis loved identity. They loved this idea of they said like strong borders, solid hierarchy. Everything was like, that's why they were called the Axis, right? It's like there's an Axis and then there's the allies that all gather around to fight the Axis, right? The imagery is perfect. And And then the Allies were like this ragtag group of people that don't have a centralized government, that were, diverse, and took down the Axis. Now that's a story, and it's a very legitimate story. Sometimes identity becomes tyrannical, and you have to kind of take it down. But if you play that story for too long, at some point it starts to become excessive. So at first you say, obviously fascism is evil, right? But, just nations are kind of like identities too, right? So ethnostates, they're kind of fascistic. They must be also fascist. And then actually not just ethnostate, but just nations. Nations themselves, they have borders and they have centralized power, so they must be fascistic too. And then you go, oh wait, families. Look at families. Like families have like a father and a mother and children, and there's these and so you end up devolving the idea of the axis all the way through society to a point where it just doesn't hold anymore. You can't oppose the family, like you can't oppose nations.
The gym is far right. The Guardian had an article.
Exactly. Anybody who wants discipline, anybody who wants to manifest any kind of masculinity is
masculinity,
fascist.
right? That's in terms of demonizing men, and the young guys who listen to the podcast who feel this is the root of it, is the demonizing of borders, boundaries, hierarchy, masculinity.
Yeah, and even
that's
if you love your history, you are necessarily a fascist. If you're just happy to be part of a lineage, like you're obviously fascist. So all of that, obviously at some point that can't hold. And especially as the opposite becomes more prominent, where you have this idea that you can be anything you want, that you can be a cat, that you can be a wizard, that you can be any gender that you want, you can be whatever you want, that starts to break down. And so I think that's what we're seeing. In some ways, we're kind of seeing this story reach such an excess that it's just not tenable. And people are like, well, you know what? You want to say I'm racist? I don't care. Fine. Say I'm racist. You want to say I'm fascist? Fine. I don't care. Like, I can't fight this anymore. I can't tolerate this insane, this like excess of diversity, you could say. But diversity is good. We need diversity. Obviously, the world is made of unity and diversity, but you can't just have one. You can't just say diversity. Right. If you say diversity is our strength, like my former prime minister, without unity, diversity is called decomposition. That's what diversity is, without unity. And therefore, you have to balance the swing between unity and diversity.
Yeah, if you look at it in terms of borders and openings, skin has to have ears and eyes and mouth and holes in it. If it was all whole, it wouldn't be a skin. If it had no holes, it wouldn't be useful either. Just on the biological level, a cell has borders and barriers. It lets things in and out, but it's not too open, not too closed. This makes sense to me. And I think in a way, the reason I'm not like super depressed and angry about this is the women. I noticed a year or two ago, women at different demonstrations, or mums would come to me quietly and say, hey, Mark, I want to be kind and I'm not a racist, but I think this has gone too far. Like hippie mums would come to me and then they'd be concerned and say, I went along with it a few years ago and I, use pronouns, but now the people who are like doulas, they're kind of like hippie midwives would come to me and say, this is forcing into our space. And particularly when the kind of kids started to be threatened. And as soon as the mums were on board, I went, okay, this is already turned. I don't need to worry about this anymore. I don't need to shout.
Yeah, don't wake up mama bear. That's a very dangerous thing. And so, the feminine archetype or the feminine image, in some ways, it is always naturally geared towards compassion, right? And it kind of has to, because infants need compassion. Children need compassion. They're fragile. You have to help them. And so there's a general tendency to kind of extend that compassion also to the weak aspects of society, or the stranger, and so this is a natural thing that women and the feminine kind of does, but it has to be balanced out. Like, you can't just have absolute compassion for the stranger, because sometimes that's an invasion. Sometimes when there are too many strangers on your border that are coming, it's called an invasion. And so you have to be able to discern the difference between like normal openness and hospitality towards those from the outside, and at the same time, you could say, and the same with like the gender stuff. It's like, we understand that there's variation. Everybody knows that like nobody totally fits the mold of sexual things. Like everybody has their quirkiness, everybody has their thing. And so we kind of want to have compassion for that. But there's an excess to that compassion, right? When that compassion leads, people to cutting off a 15-year-old's breasts, and then giving a young, a prepubescent boy hormones to the point where they end up with a micropenis and like are literally ruined for life. That's different. That's like a level of compassion that reaches into kind of insane, monster level compassion.
Let's look at this body piece then. So a lot of people listening to this, they're into embodiment. And I expected far more pushback from the embodiment world against the woke thing, but
Mm,
no one dared. Very few people did. I got in a lot of trouble for it, but very few people did. But I think they kind of knew, like, hey, we're into body mind, and some sense that the Catholic version would be John Paul II's theology of the body. The
yeah.
person is embodied, Christ is embodied. The hippie version is holism, the Asian stuff around body mind holism. And then this weird kind of Cartesian thing came back strongly. I distinctly remember it. The British newspapers got obsessed with trans, really
Mm,
obsessed with it. I was like,
yeah.
where's this coming from? I was like, why is this such a thing culturally all of a sudden? And a lot of it seemed to be the denial of the body. Now, I worked with quite a lot of trans people, particularly in Russia, where they have a really hard time, done trauma workshops. And it seemed to me a lot of them were fairly dissociated from
Yeah.
trauma, from various kind of issues. So a lot of compassion there. I didn't always felt like that wasn't easy cards to be dealt. It
Yeah.
wasn't easy cards to be dealt. But then simultaneously, my experience, my belief is that the body is a key part of who we are. So the idea of we're a little ghost in a machine riding a brain taxi, it just doesn't make sense to me logically on any level. So why was it pushed so hard culturally? I say transhumanism because this could also lead into the sort of upload yourself to the cloud kind of more technological version that we're now seeing pushed. Why do you think this became like the central issue a few years ago and maybe is still like the most sacred group in the kind of woke church?
Yeah. Well, there are a few things. One is there's a desire for transcendence. There people have a desire for transcendence, and there's a mistaking between transcendence and transgression, you could say. And this is something that's been going on since the World War II. This idea that in order to transcend something, you have to transgress it. So think of rock and roll, think of punk, think of 60s kind of counterculture where rules are bad because they limit what I am really, and therefore I have to escape the system. I have to escape the matrix. I have to escape the rules so that I can be free and transcend the system, right? And so this has all kinds of instantiations. It's instantiated socially, like in terms of this kind of rock and roll rebellious culture. It's instantiated in storytelling as always the tyrannical system and the individual that's oppressed by that system, whether it's the Matrix, whether it's whatever. But then
Plucky
it's also
rebels of Star Wars, always the plucky
yes, Star
rebel.
Wars is exactly a good. Star Wars is a World War II story. It's like the Axis versus the Allies. It's the exact story. But then it also has a personal instantiation, and that personal instantiation is that you have to be free from your body, and that is true both in terms of the manner in which there's a transhuman aspect of it, which is the technological kind of, like you said, upload your brain into the computer thing. There's also this internet reality where you can become your own avatar, where you can create you can self name, right? You can name yourself, you can self create, you can create yourself. And ultimately, the trans thing is the same. It's this idea that in some ways my body, the way that I'm manifested, is a limit that I have to escape, and I have to kind of I have to become what I want to be.
Let me make sure I'm not going to make you take a shot yet, but I want to be really clear on this. Like, so it's the idea that all limits are bad. The body is somehow a limit. I don't want to be caged in even by my own skin. This idea, the real me is not this embodied creature. The real me is something within that. Sometimes people misunderstand Christianity that way, right? Like a little ghost
Yeah.
that goes off to heaven, which is kind of bizarre.
Not Christian at
Yeah,
all.
it's not Christian. It's a heresy as far as I'm
Yeah, for
concerned.
sure.
But particularly it's like this is the religion where God came down as a dude, and as soon as he was brought back to life, said, "I'm hungry. Can I have
Yeah.
some food, please?" This is pretty embodied. So, one more time, just like why does this trend in modernity lead to disembodiment?
Well, why does it lead to disembodiment? It has to do with, look, I mean, we could go even further than this. Like we could say that it's a Luciferian gesture. That is, it is this idea that you don't get to tell me what I am. I am what I decide I am. I am self-willed. And this is the Luciferian gesture, right? It's the kind of image of Milton's Satan, Lucifer, who says, rather to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. And so this is the main kind of thinking of the modern man. It's there in the Enlightenment. It has all of its different instantiations. And so it's just that people obviously at the outset didn't realize that at some point people would also want to be free from their bodies. And that's why there's also, like, it's not just about sex, right? That's why there's the whole furry kind of aspect to it. There's this whole kind of cosplay and all of these types of things that people want to do, which is I want to self-will. I want to be myself.
So,
And
just
so,
for our more innocent listeners, a furry is someone who sort of dresses up as an animal and they go to
yeah, but
conventions.
they don't just dress up as animals. They identify as some kind of animal. That is that they want to embody something. They want to embody something else, and it's there in, like, all of this is, it's there in everything. Like it's there in video games. Like all these things they're not evil in themselves, but the fact that we play video games, that we have characters in video games that we control and that are doing things and that are in these fantasy worlds, all of these types of trainings that we have, which is to kind of to disembody ourselves from this body and to re-embody ourselves in some kind of fantasy body. All of this leads to something like trans, something similar to that. And then what happens with the trans figure is that the trans becomes an image of transcendence, and it becomes almost a divine figure. And this
Sacred,
is there
sacred.
in the trans movement. There is this whole kind of trans is sacred strain in the trans movement. And so it's like I would say it's confusing the androgynous with the hermaphrodite. And so there's a sense in spirituality where you do have to transcend your limits. This is a true thing. It's true in Christianity, but it happens through what you are. It's not by becoming something else. And so, in through the embodiment of my life in spiritual practice, I should become more androgynous. That's a real thing. And I should be able to kind of see the value of the feminine. I should be able to kind of integrate those into myself. But I do it as being a man, Jonathan Pageau,
You see in
living in
old
this
married
place.
couples, right? Old married
Yeah, of
couples who
course. And
start to
that's
look
also
to get
part
to know
that's
each
also
other.
part of it too. But so this idea that in some ways moving beyond category and kind of transcendence, like St. Paul, who says, in Christ there's neither Greek nor Jew nor man nor woman, blah, blah. And so it's like, oh, you have to transcend the categories. Yeah, that's true. But then when St. Paul talks about how to relate to each other, he says, well, if you're a man, you do this. If you're a woman, you do this. It's like, wait a minute, how can he contradict himself? He's not contradicting himself. It's not about transgressing your role. It's about in your body, in your existence, moving towards something which is, you could say, beyond yourself, but not in a way that denies it.
Mm, mm. My partner, I want to, she's going to be my fiance as soon as the ring comes back from the shop, hopefully. So I don't know, she's kind of like a quantum engagement at the moment. We've bought the ring, but haven't put it on. She's Italian, and she says that Jesus was Italian because the central rite of Christianity is feeding people. Like the central, I mean, maybe the Jews would say the same thing. So it seems like that in that Christian tradition, there is this very embodied, eating together, communion, mass, singing together. These are very embodied things. And I know you're kind of an intellectual guy. You admitted earlier to me you're a bit heady sometimes. Let's talk about that because I studied going to church really, first of all, for the beauty. I just started sitting in churches and finding them soothing and beautiful.
Mm,
And then it was like the ritual. And I even participated in it while living in Croatia, in Croatian, not speaking Croatian,
mhm.
right? It's more comfortable now. I'm going to an English mass again. What is that? embodied, ritualized kind of group, and that you can't get that in a yoga class. Like a yoga class has a bit of it, like everyone doing all the poses together. But there's something about that communal activity with the body in a beautiful space. Speak to that if you would.
Yeah, well, it's a condensed image of reality. It kind of makes reality all of a sudden shine very strongly because in some ways, that type of behavior is something we do all the time. We do it on a slow level, right? We all live together, we obey the same laws, we all have different jobs and functions that participate in the unity of a community. We do the same in the family. We live and we have different roles and different responsibilities, and it brings us together. But what happens when you're in a church is that you kind of experience that, you could say on steroids. People have experienced that at concerts a little bit, where it's like the fact of all being together and attending to the same thing and all knowing the words and singing together with the band gives us this kind of ecstatic sense. But in church, what happens is that this is put in the service of that which really unites us. It's not in the service of some rock band that's entertaining. It's in the service of the infinite source of all things, which is the God of love, which binds, reality together. That's pretty good. Like to be able to stand together and to celebrate that is one of the highest ways to participate in reality.
Mm-hmm. Is there something a little heady about this? I mentioned this kind of half-joking JP lineage. John Bavacki has the wrong surname, unfortunately, but otherwise he'd be in there as the fourth. I spent a lot of time studying his stuff. We had him on the podcast. And, Peterson's an academic, Bavacki's an academic. You're not associated with university as generally as I understand it, but you're a super bright guy, your brother too. And I think John has a Tai Chi practice as well.
Yeah.
So he definitely has some practice kind of element. Do you think there's some risk in the sort of hyper intellectual in this rather than the more feminine, grounded, kind of Mother Earthy stuff?
Yeah, for sure. There's something, you know, there's something about how the peasant religion is the best. Like, the peasants are always saved. The peasants don't go to hell, right? Because they just have this real, just natural embodiment where they participate in church. They don't have to completely understand it. It is this kind of participative thing. When you're too smart, sometimes you hit a barrier, which is I want to understand this, right? I want to know what's going. I want to know the meaning of the rituals. I want to know the meaning of the things. There's nothing wrong with that, but it sometimes can be an obstacle to true participation. But there is something to say about one of the things that, for example, Christianity offers is also like a coherence of embodiment, and that I think is important, especially now because I love John, as you know, he's a good friend of mine, but there is a kind of idea that if you just have practices, this is going to be enough, right? So you have these different practices that kind of embody you, and this is good, but the difficulty with that is that the practices don't scale. That is, that there isn't a kind of subsidiary or fractal relationship between the different levels. So what I mean is that, like you talked about yoga, it's like yoga is great, but there's how does yoga participate in your family life?
You can't get married in a yoga studio. There's probably someone who has, but
Yeah, I'm
generally.
sure that happens. But how does it feed into your relationships? How does it feel into your ethical life? How does
Mhm.
it feel? Because you have a lot of people that love the spirituality, but want to live immoral lives, for example. So one of the things that Christianity does is that the prayer that we have in church, right? We come together, we kind of pray, we recite certain things, we participate in this stance in front of the infinite, and then when we go home, we do the same. We do it before meals. We have this kind of layered participation, and the story that it embodies, it's our story, right? It's like the story of Christianity. It's not like Star Wars or Marvel. It's actually our story, and we're part of that story. The saints were real people that we can go to where they lived, and we can see their relics. We can, it's this fully kind of integrated worldview that you can participate in.
One question, maybe a challenge from the new atheists who kind of feel old-fashioned now, actually.
Yeah, I know. It's
I feel
great. I love it.
okay, really cool. Okay, that's still a thing. Someone sort of did a Reddit atheist thing on me the other day of like, yeah, but why don't you believe in the other religions? Why this religion? And part of me thinks it's just imprinting. Like I was brought to Catholic churches when I was young. Another part of me says, no, no, I'm not. I'm going to be really anti-postmodern here. This is just the best one. This is the most true, and not the most true for me. The most true. How would one in a multicultural society lean into a religion with real faith, like not with just like, well, I kind of choose this one today because it suits me, some kind of consumer attitude.
Yeah, well, I think that, this view from nowhere, it's like a bullshit view from nowhere. There is no view from nowhere. This is again the same problem of the Cartesian separation that you mentioned. This idea that the new atheist can kind of stand outside of everything and look in and say, "Oh, well, he believes this, he believes that, he was that." Well, who are you? Where are you standing? What is this? And so I think
Sorry,
that
the view from nowhere, the objective position that
yeah, this like
I'm yeah.
weird, like objective alien in space that's looking, at the system from nowhere. That's not possible. And so, the for example, like as a Christian, you can definitely believe, and I believe that there's value in other religions, that there are some things that are good in other religions that necessarily so. I mean, it's the foundation of all these civilizations, and it holds families together, it does all these things. But I can also at the same time, like you said, clearly believe that Christianity is the best, that it in some ways has the most, and I can describe it and I can defend it. And then you can argue with me, but I'm not going to stand nowhere and talk about religion as if it's not part of my life.
I love memes and I follow memes because it seems like the culture emerges kind of bottom up. And first it goes into Kanye's head and he goes insane. And then it goes to the sort of Tim Dillon's rants on some Joe Rogan podcast. The comedians are sort of on the edge of it. And you're usually one of the first people that can articulate something. Like I was feeling the post-World War II consensus thing and I saw you on a podcast 6 months ago. I was like that, right? It's like that ability to articulate the kind of emergent culture. So I'm wondering kind of what happens next with the body, like because even the trans thing, it seems like okay, the most extreme version of that is passing. Some British in Britain, some trial just got closed down for being dangerous. The Tavistock clinic was closed down for going too far, to say the least. So I wonder what's like. We need to talk to Kanye. Like what's emerging in the kind
Let's
of
talk
get
to Kanye.
Kanye. It's always a dangerous activity talking to
Yeah, yeah,
Kanye.
yeah. Well, I think
So
people have to know that I've been watching him. I've been watching Ye for years since 2004 because I feel like he's a tuning fork. And if you want to know what's coming, you can watch him and you can see what the next thing is. And so when he became Christian, I thought, okay. And then we saw this massive influx of Christians, like in my church, has quintupled, let's say, in the past few years. And so there's this like mass influx of young people. And then when he became a Nazi, I was like, okay, like what's coming? And then this big push to criticize Israel and stuff. So it's true that we have to pay attention to him to kind of see what's coming. But I think that in terms of the trans stuff, the world actually has a shape, right? The world actually has a form, and you can twist it for a while. But if you twist it for too long, it reacts. It's like a rubber band. You can stretch it, but at some point it snaps back. And I think that is something that we're going to see. What we hope is that the snap back is not too violent, because those children, my daughter, who is 18, she has like four of her childhood friends that have transitioned. That's how crazy it was. And so those children that transition are going to hate us, right? They're because it's not going to make them better. And so we don't want that return to be so strong that it's going to become tyrannical. But I think that the hope is that people, I tell people go to church. It's like the best thing to do right now is to actually participate. Delete some of the apps from your phone. Try to be in the world and try to be with people. That's the best remedy for a lot of this nonsense. The trans thing is an online thing. The trans thing is
yeah.
online infection because people can disassociate themselves with the screen, and that becomes part of their existence where they're disassociated already.
Yeah, my priest says you're always welcome in Slovenia. And then just before this, I was invited 20 people around for dinner. It's like enough online. Let's just eat some food with people Let's
Yeah.
have some. And you're talking about boundaries. I was like, maybe I won't invite that addict friend who's fairly newly in recovery to my house. There was some boundary setting, but still that real world contact. We are going to retake Constantinople, though, right? I mean, like bare
Well,
minimum. I mean,
Mark, like, we'll see. We'll see. I think that the way that it's going now, I don't see who exactly is going to do that, but I do hope to see a sufficient Christian revival.
I'm mostly joking. There's a lot of memes going around about crusades at the moment. And
Yeah.
I saw there was a right-leaning demonstration in Manchester, I think at the weekend, and there was crusader crosses at
Yeah.
this. And Britain's been a very secular country. The Anglican Church is super woke, like crazy woke.
Yeah.
But what's emerging outside of the Anglican Church is a kind of resurgence, very grassroots. And
Yeah.
often the memes become kind of true. So all the memes about crusading and Constantinople, there's been a whole bunch of them. Reject modernity and his guys
Yeah.
in knights and armor. There's
Yeah.
something in that that could be super healthy, but it's also it's potentially pretty dangerous as
Oh
well.
yeah. But this is the problem. It's like, I when I went to college, I was told that the Crusades were absolute evil. I was told that the Crusades were this horrible thing that we did. And then, and so we were taught that something that founded Western Europe, that was one of the basis of the strength of Western Europe, was this absolute evil thing, right? And so that's just one example. There are so many examples of this, right? It's like if you are this race, if you're white, if you're a man, if you're this, you are evil in yourself. And so you're evil, you're just pure evil. And so it's normal that at some point people are like, wait a minute. And then they look at the Crusades and they realize the Crusades were absolutely justified. Like it doesn't mean that the Crusades, that there were bad things that happened in the Crusades. Obviously, we did bad things, but the idea that the Crusades weren't justified, that's crazy. Like literally, Constantinople was on the verge of being taken. So it's totally normal that they would ask for help to defend themselves against the invading Islamic army.
Yeah, it
And
was
so I
several
think
hundred
that
years of piracy, and it was in many ways a defensive action, even if improperly applied.
yeah. Yeah, and so I mean, so that's just one example, but it has this core in it, which is that as we are in some ways hating ourselves, and you talked about how you followed every religion except Christianity. Like this has been the thing since the 1960s, which is that everything except us is valuable, and that's just not tenable. You can't live that way. Either you disappear, either you'll be completely swallowed by the outside, or at some point you kind of wake up and realize, no, wait a minute, it's okay to defend my family. It's actually okay to defend my nation. It's okay to believe in something.
It's okay to believe in something. Let's talk about that okay defense. So in martial arts, there's a sort of moral case for using martial arts in defense. In Christianity, there's the notion of the just war. World War II and Star Wars, I think The Simpsons says, was it in Star Wars and The Simpsons? It says the only three just wars were the American War of Independence, World War II, and Star Wars.
There you
But
go.
this idea of the just war, and I have to be very careful here because next time I go through Heathrow to see my mum and sister, I might get it's like quite serious issue. The one line that can't be crossed is let's say the morally justifiable use of force. And I go, all right, where's that line? I mean, we just discovered that we're led by pedo cannibals, and it's like, hang on a minute, like, is that not a line? Like, this is seems like a kind of a big line. I mean, what in the UK, this is the key issue at the moment. Like, has a line been crossed? And I'm certainly not inciting anyone here for anyone if Keir Starmer's thought police are listening. And let's look at it abstractly and philosophically. When is there a line where we go, okay, this is looking a bit satanic now? Like that started off as a joke. And then it was like, okay, but this Olympics also kind of looks a bit satany. And I was in a hotel the other day that had literal golden calves in every room and all sorts of weird satanic imagery in the hotel. And it just seems to be everywhere. And it started off like I was joking. And now I'm going, where is that line where people say, okay, yeah, a little bit more is needed now?
Yeah. Where's that line? Well, the truth is that no matter what the line is, the solution is to become more, to become better, right? And so this is the issue that you see with everyone. It's like even like the right-wing people, let's say the right-wing people that are angry that there are too many immigrants, but they don't have children. It's like the same with all of this. It's like you hate the satanic imagery, but you don't go to church, right? And so people are feeling these satanic pedophiles that are kind of ruling us, but they don't love their own story. They don't participate. They're not involved in their community. And so I think that no matter what, that's really the solution, because there's nothing we can do about right now. I mean, what can you do about the elite pedophiles or the elite that rule over us? There's not much you can do except be connected to where you're from, be connected to who you are, be connected to to your community, and build something strong down here. Because the reason why we're kind of ruled by these kind of elites that don't care about us, is because we also like to not be responsible. We also like to
Right,
just
right.
like to just be taken care of, you know? So if you like to be taken care of, then maybe the people that'll be taking care of you, at some point you realize that you're food for them. That they don't actually care about you. They just see you as resources. So I think that there's a lot of that has to be kind of reclaimed. But the way to reclaim it is really is embodiment. That's a good way of, exactly what you're talking about, is to live in your life, live in your family, live in your community. That's really the only way to go.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'm speaking to a kind of powerlessness there, and maybe that's the point. A lot of trauma comes through experience of powerless. People think trauma comes through simply bad things, but it's bad things in the absence of meaning and in the absence of power. So soldiers, for example, don't get traumatized when they're fighting very
Yeah.
often, but they'll often get traumatized if they're being shelled or they see a friend die, and particularly if there's a lack of meaning around that powerlessness. So it strikes me we're in a situation where there's a sort of lack of meaning and there's a powerless, and of course there's always been corrupt elites. There's always been people taking, tax collector was always a dirty word, right? There's always been people that have been corrupt within the church, outside the church, all
Yeah,
sorts of
yeah.
places. But this seems like a new level of having it rubbed in our faces.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Well,
what's that? That feels like an escalation of something that's always been kind of shadowy and behind. You've always suspected, maybe, but this is like it's like the joke at the moment is you have to apologize to your conspiracy theorist friends.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, this is a harder discussion, but like one of the problems is that this is a side effect of the nation state, the way that we understand the nation state, and it's a side effect of a kind of citizenship which is that doesn't have responsibility. So, if you think about, let's think of a feudal world. So the feudal world had its problems. Like, I'm not trying to defend the feudal world, but it had a reality, which is that the aristocrat, your lord, owned the land. It was his land. And the people that were on the land were his people. And he had it was all connected. He had the responsibility to take care of that land. That's how he would get rich. But it was also the way that he would take care of that land, because it was the way that he could live and be in his position. So there was like almost like a family system, where sometimes you could obviously have a father that was crazy, but it also kind of still held together. Whereas now our elites have nothing to do with us. They have no responsibility to
Right.
us. They can live in mansions on islands that you don't know about, that have no connection to you, yet they have power on you, and they see you as their resources that they get their money from, but they don't have any responsibility for you. So that's a serious problem, right? And it's the same with like especially in terms of the money, but it's the same even with like politicians. Bureaucrats don't care about you. A bureaucrat doesn't a bureaucrat doesn't feel like you're his like cousin, family, that you're like
You're an
on his,
object. You're an object at
you're
best.
just like a number to them. You're not like my serf that I have to take care of and that, works for me. No, you're just a number. And so all of that anonymity creates some of the problems which we have now, which is that the elites, they don't care about you. And it has nothing to do with everybody is trying, especially in the United States. You see, like everybody's trying to make it partisan. Everybody's like, well, Trump is in the Epstein files,
Yeah.
or Clinton is in the Epstein. No, they don't
Yeah.
care about
Yeah.
you. They're all together. Like, Bannon is Epstein's friend, and so is Clinton, and so is Trump, and all these people, and all these other people. Like, that's the problem of our system, is that they have no reason to care for you.
Right, right. There's no central fire of spirituality or meaning to gather around. There's no obligation, even if it's unfulfilled. You could at least say to a feudal lord, "Hey, you should be doing this,"
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like that, even if you're not, because you're a bad lord.
And
It's
this and the thing is that if you had a bad lord, at some point it would start to show, right? So think of the Robin Hood
yeah,
situation, right?
yeah.
It's like at some point, if you steal from your people and you take too many taxes, and you're going to make your world fall apart. It can't hold. There is a kind of natural balance, but when you have like trillionaire elites that live completely outside of any social control or any responsibility, and I mean, what are you going to do? Like they don't care. There's no checks and balances.
I wonder if the way things are falling apart because of the sort of moral order is infertility. I sometimes I wonder if late modernity is kind of a death cult. It's in a kind of death spiral. Like
Yeah.
people aren't breeding. On top of that, sort of child sacrifice is rampant. Absolutely millions of babies killed. And euthanasia in your country, I think in the
Yeah,
UK,
yeah.
probably
Is
soon, the
nuts.
MAID program, the sort of the Christian respect for life. Once that goes, and once there isn't, because having kids is hard, right?
Mm.
Like I'm talking to my quantum fiance about this, and it's like we're like, are we having kids? We want to, but we're getting on a bit. This is going to be really difficult. Okay, but we do want to because there's a bigger reason. There's a life that that's there for us. It's really important for us. But it's like the average. I spoke to my cousin the other day who just sort of said, well, they're inconvenient and they're expensive and they kind of get in the way of my dinner parties.
Yeah.
And he's a good guy. He's a good guy. He's not a bad guy, but he's caught in that like culture of money and hedonism. He's a good kid. And I wonder if just sort of
He might think differently when he's 70. Just saying.
right, right,
Just saying.
you make your middle age harder and your old age more meaningful, right? Like that's the
That's right.
potential deal. Like is just it's just people dying out the end of this is like let's not worry. I mean, all the religious people are having more sex and more kids, and that's
Well, that's
is
the
it just
thing.
a
That's
matter
when
of
it shows you that the way we think, then the system is anti-human. We talked about the trans things. Like that's a real thing. Like when let's say your main social narrative is like LGBT stuff, it means you're not making people. That's the main narrative. And this idea that in some ways it's related to what we talked about, that the idea that children are a constraint. Children are a constraint of reality on me, and it's preventing me from being completely free and doing whatever I want. And that's a misunderstanding of how reality functions. Children are an extension of embodiment. Children are your embodiment. They are no different from that. They are your body becoming larger, and let's say, you know, and the how can I say this? And then they will hold you up, right? And that's what I meant when I said your cousin or whatever. When he's going to be 7, he's going to be think
right.
differently because he's going to run out of body before people who have children is going to run out of body. Because the body isn't just this. Like the children that come and care for you and love you, and the grandchildren that come and care for you and love you, that's your embodiment. And so if you don't want to engage in that, then you're gonna run out of body and you're gonna be taken
Yep.
care of by bureaucrats who don't care about you.
Embodiment isn't just solitary, and there's a kind of intergenerational anorexia there.
Yeah, yeah.
Sound like Mary Harrington now. I
Intergenerational
love Mary. She's got some
anorexia.
great, yeah. It's like, if someone wasn't in contact with that instinct to eat, we'd say that's kind of weird because that's such a basic instinct. But actually,
Yeah,
there's only one more basic instinct than to eat, which is to reproduce.
that's
Like if
right.
you're in contact, like I'm in contact with that every morning, even at 46. I don't want to get
Yeah,
into the details there. But there's that, right? Yeah. All right, something non-controversial. Why am I obsessed with Jews? So I've always been obsessed with Jews since I went to Israel at 15 with some secretly Jewish friends who took me there. I've done multiple trauma, psychology, and peace workshops in Israel and surrounding areas. Many of my mentors are Jewish. There's a sort of shared trauma with the Irish, a lot of Jews in trauma work. I'm obsessed with Jews. I haven't got the definite article pass. They don't let me say the Jew. That's the line. Apparently, you can't cross the definite article. But I'm obsessed with Jewish people. But it seems like the world is. The right is obsessed with Jewish people again. I'm like, hasn't that what happened there? And the left is now obsessed with Jewish people. and everybody else isn't. I mean, I'm not obsessed with Albanians or Welsh people. You know, there's 5 million Welsh people. They're in a small country. Like they're pretty equivalent to Israel in many ways. I'm not constantly thinking about why am I obsessed with Jews, Jonathan?
I have to admit, I didn't think we were going to go there, but I'm fine. I'll talk about anything. That's
Listen,
totally
I'm
fine.
already cancelled. There's nothing they
Yeah,
can do
yeah.
now. It's like Mel Gibson.
Okay, so there is a very deep relationship between in the West between Christians and Jews. It's there from the very beginning. You know, the story of the relationship between Christians and Jews is the craziest story in the world. It's actually people don't realize how crazy this relationship is. That is, think about it this way. I can tell it in 5 minutes and you'll see how crazy it is. So in Israel, during the time where the Romans have taken your nation, right? So the Romans are in charge. The Romans are brutally kind of holding down the Jewish nation. The Jewish nation are pretty rebellious. They're rowdy. They cause a lot of trouble. The Romans are annoyed with them, and so there's this massive tension. This Messiah appears, and this he's kind of a rabble rouser. He says wild things that the religious authorities don't like, but that they're also afraid of because they don't want the Romans to clamp down. So they kill him. And then people start to follow him, start to convert, and people outside start to convert, and they persecute those people. The Jewish authorities persecute those people that convert. And then the Romans start persecuting them. Who would have thought? The Romans accuse them of having burned down part of Rome, and they start to like massively persecute them. Then the Romans destroy Jerusalem, burn it down, the whole thing. No more temple, no more no more nothing. The biggest destruction that Israel has ever dealt with, since the exile of Babylon or whatever. And so you have this weird situation. And so so the Jews are spread out during the Roman Empire. The Christians are there. They're being persecuted. And then the weirdest thing in the world happens, which is the Romans start to follow that Messiah that they killed before the destruction of Jerusalem. And then everything flips. All of a sudden, those Christians that were persecuted for centuries are now in power. And they're the same power that destroyed the temple. Now think about that. That is wild. That is the
If you
wildest.
replace Jews with Welsh, and I think it sounds even more wild. Like if you were to tell that story and say, okay, there's this group of people called the Welsh, right? And they were occupied by the Romans, and then like God was born into the Welsh. So God was kind of Welsh, but then the Welsh kind of killed God. So the Welsh are also responsible for that. And then the Welsh had like the money because they weren't allowed to own land. Like that, you'd see how wild it was, right?
Yeah.
If you just used another.
You use different terms. So now you have this weird relationship, which is that as the Christianity grows in the Roman Empire, they eliminate all the cults. So now there are no more of the pagan cults. No other religion is allowed in Europe except one, which is Judaism. Why? And so the Christians preserve the Jews in Europe. They let them exist as Jews, and they're the only ones. No one else is allowed to continue to exist. And it's a very weird, tenuous relationship. And so the Jews become the outsiders with us.
Right? The symbolic other.
Yeah, they become the official other. They become the remnant of an old world. They become like a residue of the old world that is still among us and is in some ways acts as a margin in every way. So the Jews act as margins in every single way. They have all of these kind of flexible positions. They don't own land. They have all of these roles that are really the role of the margin. And so when it goes well, it's beautiful and it's wonderful. Because you need that. You actually need
innovative scientists, comedians.
Yeah, you need
all
otherness
edge, right?
in you or else you become completely hermetic and you close off. So when it goes well, it's beautiful, and then when it doesn't go well, then it's kind of horrible. Because on the one hand, you have this problem, which is now you have someone with other intentions inside you. So you have people that have other allegiances that are part of you, and so when things start to go wrong, they're suspicious of them. And then sometimes maybe they also care more about themselves than you. And so that's a problem too. And so they have this problem that sets itself up. So we have a long story. I mean, it's like 1,500 years, of relationship, which means that the idea that the Jews are just like the Albanians is just ridiculous. They are completely integral to our identity as the West. They play this role in the Western story. And so, and then one of the things that happened is that for 2,000 years, they didn't have a nation. They were basically this free floating strangers that would function through the system, and that would kind of create the connections. They were like connectors, right? So they did trade, they did all of this stuff. And then after World War II, then they get a nation. And so now what does that mean? And that's why people are obsessed with Jews. And it's related to the World War II consensus, is that on the one hand, Israel is the ultimate like left-wing fantasy, because these dispossessed people that have been marginalized for thousands of years,
most persecuted, one of the
finally have their home, right? And so it's a left-wing fantasy. But then it's also like a right-wing fantasy, because they're an ethno-state, dude. We don't have ethno-states. We're not allowed
military
ethno-state.
service, tough borders. They've got a wall. Yeah, they're the sort of right wing. They're like, for the right wing people often complain, you get what we want, right? And the birth rates are sky high, highest birth rates in the developed world, even amongst the non-religious Israelis. So there's
that's
some
it.
sense of
That's
meaning
what's going
and
on.
purpose there, right? This, like my friend who lives there says, we still have a purpose. Like we have a goal, we have a reason to be, and even being surrounded by enemies gives that existential feeling of like when I used to like working as Israel. I haven't for a while, but the reason I used to like it was it was exciting. Like there's a feeling of aliveness there. There's a feeling of meaning. There's a feeling of us. It's like I'm sometimes in sort of it's kind of like you can be welcomed inside this strong other, and there's a feeling that's different than anywhere else in the world.
So that's why everybody, it is now when we talk about the end of the World War II consensus, that is part of it, which is Israel is the World War II consensus for all intents and purposes. It has everything in it. But then as the story plays out, some of the side effects of that world start to manifest themselves, which is that because of the Allies' thinking, we're not allowed nations. We're not allowed ethne. We're not allowed identity. And then because of and so those that were rejected are allowed nation and are given nation, but then they start to act like a nation. So when they start to act like a nation, then the left-wing people freak out because they're like, oh no, you're acting like a nation. You're fascist. And it's like this weird, like total inversion. It really is like an upside down world.
Well, it seems like there's a battle for the different inversions, right? So in psychological terms, this thing, the victim triangle of the victim, the persecutor, the rescuer. It seems like people are really fighting for those positions now.
Yeah.
Like they were relatively established for you're the victim, you're not.
That's right.
The white guys are the persecutors. But now it's like, okay, as a white young British guy, you have lower educational achievement, you get discriminated against by the civil service and the police and what have you. So now there's this battle for the positions in this victim triangle.
Yeah, and what has to collapse is that thing. This idea of the absolute victim and the absolute oppressor, which is at the core of the World War II narrative, that has to fall. If it doesn't fall, we are in serious trouble, because it's going to get really, really nasty if that doesn't fall. In the medieval world, the Crusades, for example, there was this idea that your enemy was honorable. Right, this idea that although we're there and we're fighting the Muslims, Saladin is the most noble enemy, and this idea that in some ways you were able to, even though you had to be in a position and you had to have to fight, you could understand the position of your enemy, and you could be careful. Like when you read the Iliad, the Trojans are noble. Right, you understand their position. You understand their story. It's not just like the good guys and the bad guys and like the oppressor and the victim. And we have to break that so we can understand that sometimes the West is an oppressor and sometimes it isn't. And sometimes Israel is an oppressor and sometimes it isn't. And we have to be able to see through this cloud to understand a more subtle version of reality, or else we are screwed. Like it's going to get nasty if we don't get to that.
Jonathan, I heard a member of the Canadian curling team swearing at the Swedish guy just a few days ago. I thought, this is it. We've crossed the Rubicon. This is the line. Even the Canadian
The
hurling team
Canadians.
see the Swedes as the enemy. This is it. We're doomed now. This is the last card has fallen. I'm with you. All right, let's talk about movies maybe as we move towards close. Just, as we've covered, Peter
Go for
elites,
the
trans,
hardest conversation ever, hardest
Peter
subject in
elites,
the world.
trans, and Jews. And I just want to say for the record, I am not suicidal. Jonathan looks also pretty happy and well. Okay, like we love our lives. So just for the record, seen any good films lately? I love your movie analysis because you'll watch a Marvel movie and you'll be like, well, the reason that this superhero does this is because of the World War II. I love it. I love it. So, seen any good movies lately?
If I have seen any good movies lately, there aren't a lot of good movies happening lately, to be honest. Hollywood seems to be in free fall and they're struggling to know what story they're going to tell.
Okay, why
I,
is Lord of the Rings better than Harry Potter then? Let me ask you that because my quantum fiance and I, we had the deal that before we got married, she had
yeah,
to watch Lord of the Rings.
yeah.
She made me watch Harry Potter. I didn't think that was fair. I didn't know there was 7 movies. Uh, but like, just for the record, I want to send this to her afterwards. Why is Lord of the Rings superior to Harry Potter, Jonathan?
Yeah, well, Lord of the Rings is definitely superior to Harry Potter. I mean, because it creates. I mean, in terms of the story, think about Harry Potter. What is it? The story of Harry Potter. The story of Harry Potter is that there's a secret elite wizards that we don't know about that are actually the ones dealing with the true issues of the world and are kind of fighting amongst themselves about what's really happening in the world. And in that, there's like this young muggle who isn't who obviously is a kind of like mixture mutt character who is really the true chosen one, and you're probably the real true chosen one, and everybody's going to love you and everybody's going to immediately recognize you as being like the best at everything
Millennial
all the
fantasy.
time, nonstop. That's Harry Potter to me. I just
Right.
I just find it not particularly insightful. Whereas Lord of the Rings, the hobbits and their journey from innocence into suffering and into challenge, like these are the real things of reality. Not about. And at least in Lord of the Rings, the secret wizards are bad. You know, those secret wizards that you don't know who they are really, and they're kind of hiding and they're doing their own thing. They're the ones whispering, worm tongue whispering in the king's ear. There's Saruman who's pretending to be nice, but is actually, under Sauron's control. Like that's actually more like when, as we see the Epstein stuff, we're like, yeah, Lord of the Rings describes a better
Right.
version
It's more
than this
true.
idea of secret wizards that are supposedly fighting our fight for us.
Mm. Science fiction, Star Wars, Dune, or Warhammer. Do you know Warhammer?
I whatever.
This is why I'm all into everything's a heresy. Warhammer has primed me to be Catholic again. Everything's
Yeah,
a
we
heresy.
someone has been my Deacon Seraphim Roland, who I do the podcast with. He's been really wanting us to do a symbolism of Warhammer. It's to me, it was completely when I saw it, I was like, "What is this thing?" It's like over the top. Everything. It's like let's take anything and ramp it up like 50 times. I think that Star Wars. The reason why Star Wars is so successful and why it's so good is that it is the World War II consensus. It really captures it in the most beautiful way. This vision of the hero's journey mixed with this idea of taking down the tyrant. I think it's a powerful story. I think it is that story is running out. But it is a powerful story. The Dune story is far scarier, and it's scary that we're doing that now. It's still scary that we're doing Dune right now. They were beautiful. I love the movies. They were really amazing. The second one, like that scene when Paul basically is like becoming a kind of weird like cult figure. It's so compelling. I mean, it's like I could be convinced by him to like enter his cult, whatever. But it is a little scary. It is more of a it has a darker element of the kind of jihadi revolutionary kind of thinking in it. So I don't know. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Whew. This is a wild ride, Jonathan. I've enjoyed it. Is there anything that you don't get asked about that you would just love to talk about?
I
We
think
got
that
five.
you've
Let's go
asked
five.
me about pretty much like a lot of the really hard things. It's funny because the I always wonder if people can ask me about Jews and about the situation we're in, and usually people don't. And I don't. I love, I have a lot of Jewish friends. I really have a kind of affinity towards Jews. I also see the difficulty that we're in terms of the story. But these are tough subjects to talk about.
Well, I'm funny, sarcastic, and I like money. So, every time I go to Israel, they would say to me, "Are you Jewish?" And I just look down and say, "You want to check?" But that usually kept me for another hour in migration being questioned. But it was always fun. Okay, this
I
has
have I
been.
have the craziest story. I want to tell you. I've never said to
Go
tell the story in public, and I'm going to tell it to you because it's the craziest story. I once met a young Greek man who was adopted and was Greek, and he really was very frustrated at the Greeks because he said the Greeks don't take care of their people, the Greeks don't like help each other, and so he said the Jews, they really care for each other, like they really help each other, and so he
on.
started to pretend that he was Jewish and would like go to Jewish family services and say, I'm Jewish, but I don't, my parents weren't particularly practicing, and I really want to learn about my own tradition, and they would like set him up. And this
He
guy
was
had like,
trans-Jewish.
yeah, he was trans Jewish, and he like he had been in trouble. It's some either the reason I met him is because he'd been in prison and he was really struggling, and we kind of tried to help him out. So he had this like really wild past, but he was like pretending to be Jewish, and they set him up with a rabbi, and the rabbi was like teaching him to like do the tefillin and like to pray and stuff, and I was thinking, dude, what, like, where do you think this is going? Like, how is this going to end? How's this story going to end? And then at some point the rabbi found out and basically just shut him out, which is totally normal. But it was the weirdest thing in the world to find someone who was trans Jewish. I didn't think that was possible. He was like a reverse Sabbatean. He was like pretending to be Jewish. It's just a
Jonathan, I
weird
feel like
thing.
we just reached some kind of ultimate heresy here, like there's a Tibetan thing, which is what's the worst thing, and it's like to make love to your mother on this certain day at this certain temple. It's like the worst thing you can do in Tibetan Buddhism. I feel like we just did the worst thing in modernity somehow. We kind
It's
of
like
hit.
but you can understand why at in the World War II consensus at some point
Mhm.
people would have that like you could say that urge, and you see it in Messianic
Right, right.
Christians. You see something like that in Messianic Christians. Obviously, they don't go as crazy as my like wild, crazy Greek guy, but this desire, you see it in Messianic Christianity, kind of to participate in that story because
There's a
they see
beautiful,
something powerful, like you said in Israel,
yeah.
like there's some kind of strength there.
There's a beautiful desire there, joking aside, to be part of a people. I'd love it if the Irish or the English, that's where I come from, would have that strength. And that's there in
Mm,
Ireland, actually. The island's going to be a flashpoint in Europe because they don't have the guilt from colonialism because they were
yeah.
colonized. So that desire to be part of something, to be included, to be on the inside of that warmth, to have a people and a tradition and to not be apologetic for that. Like I think that's a beautiful desire if we take away, some of the worst World War II, mid-20th century German excesses from
Yeah.
that, like to actually get back to the beauty of that desire, not just it's scary, it could go too far, let's be careful. Like is
Yeah,
it
we have to find the balanced version of it, or else it's going to come back with a vengeance, and that's what is exactly what we don't want. Is that if you play internationalism too long, then you get a Weimar reaction. You'll get this like extreme forms of ethnicity and nationalism, and what we want is more of a, like you said, a kind of a joy of being who you are and participating in what you are, but also a normal sensitivity to strangers and a normal hospitality towards people that aren't like you. Like that's what we need.
I always like Scruton's kind of very English love of home, not hatred of the other.
Yeah, there you
I
go.
just
Yeah,
love
that's a good
home. I
way of
thought that
thinking.
just was very kind of pleasant, grandfatherly. Okay, last thing then, young men, a lot of young guys listen to this. Maybe they're lacking meaning, their mental health's not great, they feel everyone's against them. What would be your message for the guys, for the bros?
For the bros. I mean, I say go to church. That's my thing. I think that being engaged in the Christian tradition, gives you the right posture, a kind of humility, a kind of confessing, that responsibility comes back on you. You're not a victim of everything. I think that can be helpful. And also, connecting with real people in that sense. The online world is, I live online. I make my living online. I do podcasts and I do that, but it's a very dangerous hole
This
that
is why
sucks
I'm
you in.
surprised how you seem so well and happy and like open in your embodiment. Like I'm genuinely impressed because I know how many interviews you do and how many videos you make.
Yeah,
Like
well,
you've got a
I mean,
huge
my
amount of
life is
content.
not here. Like my life is right out outside this door. Like that's where my life is. So.
Where do people find you
So
in
people can
person and
go to, yeah,
online?
people go to symbolicworld.com. That's where most of the stuff I do is. My YouTube channel will be listed on there. I also like, we're doing fairy tales. We're selling. I wrote some children's books. Like there's all these kinds of things that I'm doing that are involved in this. Hopefully, kind of like what you said, like kind of celebratory thing where we can celebrate our stories again. We can find joy in them without shame and in a subtle way.
Jonathan Pageau, I think I love you. May just be you look like my dad, but you're the man. Absolutely. This was just so much fun. Thank you for your time.
Well, it's great to meet you, Mark. I really enjoyed it.